Morning, everyone. We'll wait for our participants to log in as we see the numbers climbing. So we'll give it a minute or so. Thank you for joining us. Okay, it's 10:01, so we're going to get started. I know we'll have some late arrivals, but thank you for joining us today. What proves to be should be a very interesting and entertaining and informative panel. We have some very distinguished guests, some of them BIA alumni. I want to start with Lucy Dunn, who's here with us today, CEO of the Orange County Business Council. Lucy's an icon in our community and represents us on multiple fronts up in Sacramento, Washington, D.C. Her areas in transportation and housing is unparalleled, and the first woman president of BIA. We're happy to have her here today, and I'm happy to have her as a strategic partner and part of our business coalition as we try to thread the needle and try to push for business-friendly building industry policies here in Southern California. We're also joined by a very good friend of mine, Phil Hawkins, CEO of Pacific West Association of Realtors, largest association in the state of California and one of the largest in the nation. He is here to talk today about what his organization is doing and what he's seen out there in the market. And then we have Rich Lambros, who had my job previously. Rich is the managing director of Southern California Leadership Council, and he also has a very good government affairs advocacy firm. Rich has been very instrumental, not just helping the BIA, but the business community in terms of policy efforts for Southern California and also for our labor agreements for BIA. And then we have President and CEO of the Inland Empire Economic Partnership, Paul Granillo, also a very strong strategic partner in our business community and is kind of the icon of the Inland Empire about what's going on out there from an economic and business perspective, and making sure that we continue to move business and create business in the Inland Empire. And we builders love the Inland Empire. We like to build out there. So that is our panel for today. I'm going to let each participant have some opening remarks, and then we'll go through the Q&A. Also remind everyone that you can pose your questions in the Q&A and just type it in there, and we'll either try to respond depending on the question. We can either type our responses or we'll try to answer them verbally. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Lucy Dunn.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. And thanks all. What a great group of folks on this panel. And of course, my heart is always in housing from my own background. So I really appreciate that introduction. And the BIA has been doing phenomenal work. There's no better time in making sure your membership dues are paid for all the work that's going through in this crisis right now. So congratulations again. I want to talk to you about basically three big points. Because there's a lot of smaller businesses, no matter what your industry sector is, a small business, how to reopen safely. If you're open, what you're supposed to be doing right now to protect against liability. Number two, I want to share with you a brand new restaurant program. I know we're not restaurants, but we all want to go to restaurants, and in dining, in restaurant dining is closed right now. So I want to bring you up to speed on what's happening there. And then the last but not least, an overarching on 5 key points that leaders in our community need to prepare for in this 2020 crisis on the pandemic. So first, OCBC, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, and pleased to be your partners on so many of their things. One of the things that I'm working on right now is, let's see if I can get this going. There we go. I'm doing this PowerPoint very quickly with Dr. Clayton Chow, who is Orange County's healthcare officer. And I've probably done scores of these on helping businesses understand how to reopen if you're closed, and how to stay open if you've never closed. Even if you're an essential business, you need to be doing these steps. So very quickly, get out your smartphones, because there's a couple slides you're going to take pictures of that will help you comply and hold back those private attorney general lawsuits that are just waiting to come after you. First, wear a damn face mask, people. It's required. It's not a political issue. Other countries that are way ahead of us, they implemented this very early on, and they're already reopening. The sooner we can get more universal use in face coverings, the more likely we can open quickly and see our healthcare numbers curve downward. So just like, remember those lines: no shirt, no shoes, no service. No shirt, no shoes, no mask, no service. You can do this as business people. If your customers feel safe, they will come back to you sooner. If your workers feel safe, they will come back into your offices sooner. Wear a face mask. There are 3 steps required by law. It is a mandate. Take a picture of this one. 3 steps to safely open your business in Orange County. First, find your industry-specific guidance here, and I'll walk through that one. Complete and post your checklist. It must be posted in the window of your offices now, today. If you don't have a checklist in the guidance, don't worry about it. You don't have to do that. And last but not least, you must post publicly an attestation, and I'll show you how to do this. First, here's what an office checklist looks like. When you go back and you look at this industry guidance, you read through the list of the things you have to do, and then find your checklist. If you're in an office, it's basically 2 pages. Don't freak out. Stuff you're already doing anyway on cleaning and disinfecting and teaching your employees. This is what your checklist looks like. This is what you're looking for after you review the guidance. A retail office a checklist would look like this. A restaurant would look like this. By the way, how many of us are visiting restaurants, but there's no checklist posted? More to come on that, because restaurants are where we want to congregate and we want that in-dining open. So we need to help them post these things. Last, take a photograph of this. This is what an attestation looks like. It's just that simple. These are the specific bullets from Orange County's healthcare agency order and the Department of Health order. This is supposed to be posted in the window of your business. Take a picture and do this. In summary, take a picture of this slide. Find your industry-specific guidance and the checklist in the guidance. Post your checklist, post your attestation. If you have any questions, this is the COVID hotline for the Orange County Healthcare Agency, or you can send them an email. They will respond to you at eteam@ochca.com. And there's some resources, another great slide. You can check the county's website. A copy of the healthcare order on everything I've just stated is right here. We've got a web page at ocbc.org on Reopen Safely where we detail this for you. And there's also, check our newsletter. We're publishing it almost every single day now with some great information that keeps you up to speed on how to reopen safely, etc. And so some good information to get you going. And I hope that will help. So that was number 1, reopen safely, no matter what your business is. Utilities on the line. Please get that information to your customers so that they can open safely. I think it would be everyone's best efforts if we promoted this as quickly as possible. Number 2, restaurants. Okay, I hinted on this. As of Tuesday, the Board of Supervisors, I take a little credit for this one because it was my idea. In order to get restaurants to comply with these healthcare orders, the County of Orange is about to reward good behavior by giving them $1,000 each restaurant for posting their checklist, complying with the guidelines, and posting their attestation. And so watch out for more information on this. We expect it to go live, but we've been allocated $10 million in CARES Act funding to go to 10,000 restaurants in Orange County. If you own more than 1 restaurant, 10 restaurants, you get $10,000. You get $1,000 for each, and the money can be used to buy masks, to buy cleaning supplies, etc. But help reward good behavior and get those restaurants up online really quickly soon. So stay tuned, watch OCBC, because we think we're going to manage that program and help the county. Okay, now big policy issues, right? 2020 crisis, it's the pandemic, stupid, right? It's the pandemic. We've got, the virus doesn't care about politics. They don't care about what political party you're going to. It's fascinating that depending on what party you believe, whether deaths are overreported or underreported, or if you're counting the right information, holy crap. Masks, whether they should be complied with. If you're Republican, suddenly you don't think we need masks. If you're Democrat, you need masks. No, everybody needs to wear a mask. It doesn't matter what your party is. Whether you're comfortable eating in a restaurant, it doesn't matter what party you are. We need to get our workers safe and our folks safe. And the economy, the inability to control the spread of this virus prevents our recovery. We don't have childcare, so people can't come back to work. We don't have masks, so people don't feel safe. And state government, their help is hit and miss. EDD is a travesty, getting out their unemployment checks to folks. It's a hot mess. So we need to watch out for that. And of course, social justice issues. There's nothing like a great pandemic to bring social justice issues and systemic flaws to the forefront. But we're fighting over statues while our unemployment rate is going heading toward 20%. And our COVID cases are increasing, and we're having trouble educating our children with remote instruction. So watch all of these big policy issues. They're going to drive you nuts, and we tend to focus on shiny silver objects, dangly shiny silver objects in front of us instead of the systemic reforms we need. So 5 key things leaders need to focus on. Trust, number 1. The most important thing is you're going to be judged on what you did to help in 2020. Expect aggressive government oversight, heightened media scrutiny, and increased activist engagement. In crisis, historically, government doesn't back down, they get bigger. That's a problem for us because innovation doesn't happen with government getting bigger. Innovation happens with small entrepreneurs. Trust. Number 2, technology. Disruptive innovation is going to accelerate. Leverage new opportunities to become competitive, smarter, more resilient businesses. Home builders, you're already there. You're starting to design homes with 2 offices because you know that remote work is in our future. Telehealth is in our future. We're going to talk more about all of these issues. Number 3, geopolitics. Plan for ongoing deglobalization, right? Diversify supply chain optionality and engage our local governments, but lead by example, because we do need to be a global environment, and especially in Orange County, we're a global hotspot where most of our folks stay connected to their original countries, their land of origin. So globalism can't go away, but there's going to be a trend on deglobalizing. 4, culture. Washington gatekeepers are losing power. So expand your stakeholder outreach, doing more than just writing checks. Who's going to partner on our priorities later because you supported them now? You supported their priorities, they will help you because you've developed a reservoir of goodwill helping them on their priorities. So be very attentive to developing those new partnerships. And last, 5, politics. I said this before, reforms are necessary here, and we need to push for those reforms. It's messy, political and policy reforms, especially in an election year, but that's why your membership in BIA, OCBC, Inland Empire, Economic Partnership, our realtors, everybody, you need to stay close with us and keep those partnerships going. So I think that's way over my time, but Jeff, that's my top line for you, and we'll get into questions.
Very good, Lucy. Very good. Thank you for that. And for those of you, OCBC has a really good, their newsletter. I read it every morning. The first thing when I get up, I turn on my phone and I look at that. It's very informative. from a business perspective, a health perspective, a local perspective, a regional perspective. It's a lot of work. So register for that. It's critical. A lot of
OCBC.org, you can sign up. Thank you, Jeff.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, very good, very informative. Thank you, Lucy. So before we get into questioning, we're gonna let everybody speak. So I'm gonna let Phil Hawkins come up next. There's nothing really going on in your neck of the woods in terms of, selling homes. So with that, Phil, I'll turn it over to you and tell us what your organization is doing and what are you seeing out there and give us the good word.
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for having me on. When this all started back in March, for the first couple weeks, the realtors and the real estate transaction was not deemed essential. And for that 2-week period, there was other chaos in the real estate transaction industry because, houses needed to close. People's lives were still moving forward, but legally there wasn't. We didn't have anything we were supposed to do. Now, don't get me wrong; things still happened, but it was really difficult. So, fortunately, our state association, I got to give it to them. They really jumped on it, and they came up with guidelines. They came up with disclosures. They came up with a bunch of things that the state wind up adopting really quickly. Our state association came up with about 12 new forms in about 2-week period. One of them being guidelines that all realtors need to follow when selling homes. That actually the state almost adopted word for word to allow the real estate industry, the resale industry, I should say, back into an essential business. Now, there were different areas throughout the state that had additional rules, but for the most part, we could still facilitate a transaction. Transactions are still happening. I mentioned just before this call, we're at an all-time high in medium home prices, higher than we've ever been. The June number was 626,170 for the medium home price in the state of California. The prices are still going up. Transaction-wise, we are down about 12% year over year, which I look at that as not a bad number. With all that is going on, to only be down 12%, it's pretty shocking to me. And in speaking with, again, I don't sell real estate. Our members sell real estate. In speaking with our members, you get a home priced under $1 million in just about any community, and it's moving pretty fast. Over $1 million is not moving as fast as we'd like, but under $1 million still moving pretty quickly. Inventory is a huge issue across our whole state. Statewide, we have about a 3-month supply if you just average out the whole state, but there's a lot of areas that have weeks of supply. And how that's calculated is if no other house came on the market for sale, you would run out of homes in that period of time. There's a lot of areas here in Southern California, we'd run out in just a few weeks if no other homes were listed during that time period. The thing that the realtors are struggling with are the open houses and the showings. We have guidelines on how to do that safely. Open houses are not allowed. That just goes against everything we're doing right now. But there's ways to show a home safely. That is still happening, and we have the guidelines to do that. The state's allowing us to do that. Most local municipalities are allowing us to do that, and it seems to be working. One thing that this pandemic has done in a positive way for realtors, I'd say, we don't have looky-loos anymore. Those people that are out there looking at homes are there to buy homes. They're just not seeing what their neighbor's home looked like when it was decorated the way it was decorated. So, the buyers are out there, the sellers are out there. The interest rates are still incredibly low. It's still, this is going on for a while now, but you know, the joke is for a lot of people that they are in love with their interest rate more than their home because you know, it's such low numbers for for the interest rate. Um, you know, I can go on, but I think I'll hold back right now because there's a bunch more I'm going to talk about a little bit later.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate that. That's very insightful. Just coming out the gate there. I like it. So, Paul, you're up next, and our CEO of the Inland Empire Economic Partnership. Paul, take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate our partnership with you. You do great work. So I want to focus on the Inland Empire, our economy, and talk a little bit about the recovery efforts. So the Inland Empire Economic Partnership has existed for about 30 years. I've been the CEO for the last 10. The Inland Empire, Riverside and San Bernardino counties is about to pass the state of Kentucky in population. So if we were a state, we'd be the 24th largest state in the nation. 27,000 square miles, so it's a big place. Riverside County is about the size of New Jersey. San Bernardino, the size of Israel. So, and if you're headed to Vegas or you're headed out to the Coachella Valley, you know that we're very, very diverse. So 52% of our population is Latino, 8% is African American, so a heavily diverse region. And so some of the issues I think that we're facing right now need special attention. So what's our economy look like? Since basically we started to shut down, we're at about 14% unemployment. It's no surprise that the biggest hit is in leisure and hospitality, then followed by retail trade, and then professional business services. All of those are down. In June, where we saw job loss was in the government sector. And that's the direct result of sales tax hitting the cities. And that, of course, for this discussion has policy implications, how the cities are able with the builders, permits, and so forth. Now, what many of you might not know is that 10% of all warehouses in the United States are located in the Inland Empire. The only state that has more warehouses than us is the state of Pennsylvania. So we are the West Coast logistics hub, tied closely to the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. 40% of all imports coming into the ports come through the Inland Empire and then go to every congressional district in the nation. And currently, through the crisis, the Inland Empire is holding up the economy of the West Coast. So all those packages that are arriving at your house, the dog food, all the things that are keeping our kids busy, most of that is coming from the Inland Empire. And because of that, our unemployment rate is less than the unemployment rate in Los Angeles, which is near 20%. The logistics sector for us is a major employer. So what are we doing in the to deal with the crisis? Crisis have the effect of having people pay more attention to issues. And so where there's an economic downturn, the Inland Empire always comes out of it end of the pendulum swing. We don't want that to happen this time. So the region is working together across the county lines. IEP is working to backbone our regional economic recovery task force. We're focused in 3 areas. One is research. So we have the president of our Cal State San Bernardino and chancellor of UC Riverside chairing a research task force focused on making sure that we're giving policymakers the best data possible because they need to know the reality of what we're dealing with. We've got an economic recovery team that's co-chaired by my current chair, Peter BIASC, who's works for Coca-Cola in Atlanta, but lives in Rancho Cucamonga. So that's how I get to have him as my chair. The market president of Bank of America, Arguello, and then Supervisor Janice Rutherford from San Bernardino County and Supervisor Karen Spiegel from Riverside County. So having the counties involved in the discussion is very important. We've got 13 subcommittees broken out by sector. Carlos Rodriguez from BIA Valdiview sits on that, along with representative from NAOP in the building arena. But it includes manufacturing, logistics, healthcare. And what we're doing is getting a sense of where everybody is. And so it becomes very clear when you listen to the different sectors who's doing okay and who's hurting. And who's hurting right now is, of course, our small business sector. We're very concerned that we could lose up to 35% of the small businesses. That's just devastating. So we're focused right now on triaging and many of the small businesses, if you listen to chamber leadership, if you listen to the banks and what the banks are having to do to support their members, it's a lot of technical services, legal and accounting, and some of the stuff that Lucy was talking about. How do you lead in this time, right? And for business entrepreneurs, right? They've got a skill set. They're ready to take risk, but this pandemic just keeps hitting them left and right, and so a lot of need for specialized services. And then second after that is the cities and municipal government. And we're going to have to be, I think, creative in how they react and continue to provide services to their citizens. Lastly, we're worried about workforce. A lot of people are going to need to be retrained for jobs that maybe they weren't planning on. So we're trying to bring together our workforce investment boards, our community colleges. There's 12 here in Riverside and San Bernardino County, but to align them closely with the employer community so that there's no one being trained for some job that isn't going to exist. And that for you as employers, it's really important for you to be involved in that conversation. And Lucy touched on this. It affects the Inland Empire, I think, a little bit more than Orange County. And that's job loss due to automation. So for the longest time, we've been looking at this issue. The Brookings Institute had done a study that said 47% of our current jobs were susceptible to automation. And the year that would happen was 2035. Because of COVID, the year that's happening is 2020. It's happening right now. So if you're in manufacturing, logistics, and you're looking at not being able to produce because of the COVID-19, you might not want to, but you're going to have to take a serious look at robotics, at AI, at systems that can allow you to continue to produce. So that's going to be a big issue for us moving forward. So Jeff, that's kind of an oversight over my beginning remarks, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Paul. Very informative. Thank you. And just a reminder for everybody, this is our first part in a series of two. Next week is our state series where we'll be having Dan Dunmoyer, CBIA, Rex Heim, the Business Properties Association, Rob Lapsley, Business Roundtable, Marty Wilson of the California Chamber, next Wednesday at 9:30. So if you want to register for that, please do. Next up, we have Mr. Rich Lambros. He, former CEO of BIASC, maybe future CEO of BIASC. I don't know, Rich. Managing Director of Southern California Leadership Council. And interesting about that, Rich's board has two former governors, Pete Wilson and Gray Davis. So Rich, we're going to ask you which governor you preferred. I'm kidding. We're going to turn it over to you, Rich, and tell us about what's going on from the business community.
Well, and I hate to start by correcting you, Jeff, but we now have three former governors. We recently added Governor Schwarzenegger, so we're back to three. And we used to have Governor Deukmejian, great governor of California, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. But listen, I thank you, Jeff, for having me, and I love this panel. These are all good friends, so it's great to have this conversation. And I look out on that list of attendees, and I see a lot of familiar faces from my time at BIA. So it's great to be here. Let's jump in. Talking about the future of doing business in California. And wow, don't we all wish we had that crystal ball, right? What is that going to look like? I want to tell you a little bit about Leadership Council because this topic really is a lot of what we're focused on at that group. So as Jeff mentioned, I have the pleasure now working with 3 former governors. Southern California Leadership Council was started in 2005, really on a basic idea that I think a lot of us can appreciate. And that was the idea that Southern California is unique. Although we're tethered, of course, to the rest of the state, there's a lot of sentiment down here in the southern part of the state, and you all may talk about this in your own communities, that sometimes we're ignored by our friends in Sacramento or the North. Feels like so much of what we do in this state is really driven out of the Bay Area. And so around the beginning of the new century, there was several research projects that were done, a lot of coming together at a regional level around this idea that LA, San Diego, and the southern part of the state, which by the way, is the vast majority of our population and the strength of our economy, was not being properly represented. And we needed to build that voice for this region on the big issues, not on everything. But when we need to come together, we need to have the capacity to come together. Obvious ones are things like on water or trade or infrastructure, when Southern California needs to be united in order to get what it needs at a state level. And we need a group focused just on the regional approach and get to work with Paul and Lucy and so many other good regional groups in Southern California that we have. And then together we all look at the whole region. And that's really where I want to kind of focus on today. So in saying all that, we have 3 former governors and we have 36 outstanding CEOs of some of the biggest corporations in our region. From the home building sector, you'll recognize names like Randall Lewis, Greg McWilliams, and we also have a lot of you know Greg Bialy, who's the CEO up at Tejon Ranch. So we've got representation from real estate and development and all kinds of big industries and some big public agencies like our ports and our transportation authorities. So it's a really good group focused on the future of Southern California. And when I say that, I should be really clear. We're squarely focused on economic development and job creation. And you know that's really key. And to say that, I want to go back and I'm just going to throw one slide. And I apologize, it is pretty basic, but it's something that you know we used to just take as a given when I was a younger man. And hopefully you can see this virtuous cycle. All right. And I only mention this because when we talk about where we're going, I think it's really important to remind us where we've been. It used to be that you could count on politics and government understanding this cycle. We all understood this cycle, that with business growth came job growth. And with job growth came tax revenue growth. And that was the fuel that went into the public sector for more government services and infrastructure. And ultimately, that enhanced all of our quality of life. And when we enhance quality of life, guess what happens? We get more business growth. So it really is a virtuous cycle. And as much as this was commonplace and understood when I was young, I think this is something that's been very lost in politics and certainly some of our policies today. So again, apologize for those of you who look at this and go, yeah, that's a yawner. I know that. Well, hate to tell you this, but there's a lot of millennials and younger out there who don't know this. And they're susceptible to a belief that in fact, the economy is tethered solely to government. And that where we go as an economy is really more derivative of government budgets than private sector growth. And I say that because that sets the table for where we were going into this pandemic. And where we were going into the pandemic was we had a great strong economy here in Southern California. We're seeing a very long recovery period that led to a very long period of stability and growth in our region. We go back a year from now, we were in the past 4.3% unemployment. You know, we would love to have that today, right? So things changed quickly and obviously in unprecedented ways in March. The other things that we knew about our state going into that is, and the reason I mentioned the virtuous cycle is because we had moved away from really understanding the importance of the private sector and business growth, we had, and you all know this in the home building industry better than anyone, we have a state that's known throughout our country as the most complex regulatory environment anywhere. We often rank at the bottom of the list on places to domicile a business because of complex regulation. And then what goes with that? High taxes. So we're known for our regulation, high taxes, and no surprise that leads to one of our third things we knew about California going in, high cost of living. And all of that added up to conditions that certainly impacted what you all deal with every day, the high cost of housing, and ultimately our housing deficit, our lack of supply. So those dynamics did not change during the pandemic. Unfortunately, I think what the pandemic did was expose the weaknesses of those dynamics, especially when now you have folks looking for recovery. Let's put it in its most simple terms. It exposed the weakness of folks not necessarily being as well housed as they should have been when they had a stay-at-home order. So the pandemic has shed a bright light on this. And after years of, I would say at least the last 8 years to 10 years, I think the business sector has felt pretty frustrated at being marginalized on a lot of policies. We have a history in this state of sort of managing by crisis. If you go back over the years, if you're older like me, you'll remember, things come along and they become our center of focus. And it's not just this state, we're a bit that way nationally, but in California, a history of more recently, climate has been our focus, climate and the environment, and everything has been subordinate to that. And as that has happened, we've adopted more and more policies that, while definitely moving the needle on our carbon emissions, have added cost, business, and complexity, cost to business, and complexity to everything else. So right now, since the crisis we're dealing with at the moment is COVID and the economic recovery that's now needed because of COVID, the business community has tried since March. Lucy, Paul, Jeff, we've all been involved in this fight. Phil, we've tried to put a big bright light on unwinding some of those things, at least temporarily. So some of the first pushback the business community put to Sacramento as soon as we got into April was about regulation. We asked for a pause on regulation. You all know in BIASC there was a huge push over the last couple months to pause the new VMT regulations going into effect. And groups on this call joined you in that effort, as well as dozens of groups statewide. Seems like if that's one of our issues going in, complex regulation, and now you're in an economic crisis, it might be a good time to pause and give yourself some relief so the economy can bounce back. Unfortunately, on VMT, we mostly got deaf ears, but in other areas like state general construction permit, regulations were paused. Second, we did shine a light and we were more successful on taxes, at least temporarily. And you all saw a pausing of tax deadlines and the need to be more flexible at the state level. So when you know what your weaknesses are going in and you get hit with a crisis, we wanted to highlight those things. The question now will be, does the state learn from this lesson, and do we make adjustments? Do we actually fix some of the more systemic and ongoing problems here in these areas? And while we know that those are critical things for recovery, obviously now there's a whole lot of issues that are pushing into the forefront on that crisis management approach that our state works under. So obviously now not only COVID, but we now have social equity and other issues that they're going to very much dominate the discussion coming out. So that sets the table for what will be a really dynamic and critical next 6 to 18 months for our state, and ultimately for your business and for housing. How do we manage this crisis? How do we come out? Where can we make advances that help for business, which ultimately helps for people? Obviously, at the end of the day, at least I believe that nothing better for the people of California than economic opportunity, and that only comes from a strong business sector. So I'm going to stop there. I think maybe I've framed up some of the challenges we're going into, but I know, Jeff, we look ahead to the discussion we're about to have. We're going to get into maybe now more of the forecasting on where we go from here. But I do think in all of this, there's opportunities. There's definitely some risk, but there's some opportunities, and we'll get into that here now. So Jeff, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Rich. And please state your questions in the Q&A, and we have some Q&A of our own as well. So the first question that we have for our panel is, what are you seeing in terms of the business and policy climate now that we're in the COVID world? So what are the probably the most immediate impacts? How is government, how is the business climate adjusting to it? I know we talked about it initially, but what are you seeing right now? And I'll let whoever wants to go first. Why don't we go with Lucy again? Just keep the batting order the same.
Sure. Well, I think I shared, the most important issue for us is businesses. We don't have a federal policy, a national policy to help us get through this pandemic. This is unusual times, and 50 different states, 50 different rules. And in California, you've got a governor who everyone says is running for president. He can't deal with deaths, right? He has to protect health. An economy is one thing, but watching our health is quite another. So when we shut down, the state of California thought, okay, well, we can sort of live with that. Then we opened up, And maybe whether you opened up too soon or not, but the numbers kept rising and we're shutting down again. Geez, it just killed business to shut down the first time, then to open up again and, you know, get back all your inventory and then have to shut down again. This is killing our small business community. And so I think those are the overarching things, is really how do you, if you're going to shut down, like prepare now to reopen safely and get us through this. I think those are the number one issues I'm seeing over and over. And people say, but we should be choosing economy over health. No, it's not a binary choice. You got to choose them both and open up safely. So that, I think those are that for me has been over and over. Please let us get back to work. I got to educate my children, and how to do it safely. Wear a mask.
Thank you, Lucy. I can see you're not wearing a mask now, but that's okay.
Yeah,
Right.
but I've got one handy if you want me to demonstrate. I can demonstrate good mask wearing. In fact, here's another little thing. You know, all those dangly, shiny silver objects, right? And so we talk about renaming John Wayne Airport, JWA, right? I'd like to rename John Wayne Airport by adding an extra initial, JWAM. Just wear a mask.
Very good. Very good. So Phil, I'm going to go to you with the same question. You know, what are you seeing in terms of the business and policy climate changes, you know, in the COVID world? And I guess more importantly, I mean, you guys are you're on the front lines there. What are you going to see, you know, when COVID gets, you know, when we get out of this, when we do have a vaccine, you know, what's going to happen to the looky-loos? What's going to happen to the iBuyer? I mean, what are you going to see? What are you guys anticipating, you know, as we get through the pandemic and then as we come out of it?
So going into it, it's really heightened for us, the tenancy issue. You know, we're seeing it on a state level, we're seeing it on a regional, we're seeing it on a local. You know, right now, if somebody's not paying their rent, we cannot get them out of a house. You know, most tenants can go 6 or 9 months now without paying their rent, and there's nothing we can do. And that's a problem. In whether we're trying to sell the place, whether it's a small landlord that you know, it's the only property they own and that's the retirement. We're hearing multiple stories of small landlords that you know, this is my only income, and now my tenant's not paying. And so and that's, you know, that's always been going on over the last few years, but it really has come to a point over the last few months. And you see a stricter rent control coming up on the November ballot. So that's what we're fighting now. Now you say, where are we going from here? You know, fortunately, and I'm shifting gears a little bit here, the real estate transaction over the last 5 to 10 years has really become really automated with DocuSign, with all your forms online. So as far as that transaction itself, I don't see a whole lot of changes. In fact, there's even some new products that were out there that have come to the table for realtors during the transaction that are pretty cool for the consumer. So I actually see that the pandemic has pushed some innovative products forward that you know, the consumer is going to enjoy and like during their real estate transaction. But you know, until we get more inventory, we're always going to be discussing these issues. We need inventories at all level. When it comes to low cost housing, to medium housing, to high cost housing. I mean, we need it at all levels and out throughout the whole state. Southern California, it's probably, I shouldn't say that. Northern California, you get the Bay Area, they're in need of housing just as much as Southern California. We are fortunate to have a little more land here in Southern California. We can spread out, you know, with the Inland Empire and parts like that. But we need inventory, and the inventory can be looked at as just about anything out there. You know, I have a son that recently moved out, and you know, he was looking for that studio apartment. And you know, whether it's that or whether it's a ownership position with condos, or whether it's a single family residential or mixed use. I mean, fortunately, we just need units, and the units can be looked at as a wide variety of different types, because you know, that demand is out there for a lot of different products. And so you know, unfortunately, we're in a climate where most municipalities are fighting us when it comes to developments, especially larger developments. So hopefully, I like to say positive here. Hopefully, we you know, this pandemic has come to the forefront. You know, when you have multi-generational families living together, and you know, and maybe they don't want to. Maybe they want to, especially the younger kids living in still in their parents' house, want to broaden their wingspan. Hopefully, you're going to see a mind change in people when they says, you know what, it is okay with that development to go in here. You know, that does make sense that you put high density in this area. Now, does high density make sense everywhere? Probably not, but it makes sense in a lot of areas. So, you know, we got to figure out where we can put high density, where we put low density, and we just start building.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. Thank you. Paul, you're up. What are you seeing, you know, in terms of the climate, you know, coming out of this, where we're at? And I know that you have a large coverage area, and you're covering every business out in the Inland Empire. So what is your biggest concerns, and what are you guys looking at, you know, post-COVID moving forward?
So I think for the question about the business climate, what I'm most concerned about is attention. And this goes two ways, right? For many of our people in municipal government at the county level, just like all of us, they've been working 24/7, and they're pretty exhausted. And they're focused on the public health crisis, rightfully so. But that also means that I don't think it gives them enough opportunity to think about your question, and that's, where are we going to be when we come out? Are we going to lose 35% of the small businesses? What does that mean for office space? What does that mean for commercial? I think we need to be paying attention to those things, and that's why our recovery task force is really focused on the immediate, which is the small businesses in the cities, but there's a midpoint, and then there's a long term to this. And so I think we need to be paying attention to that. At the same time, we, the populace, right, need to be paying attention to what's going on by our policymakers. So there's 9 bills that the legislature is trying to push through. Again, focused on transit-oriented development and taking away local control from cities, right? And that's an awful lot of bills, and 3 of them, I think, are sponsored by the Senate Pro Tem. So this is a big push, and we have to be paying attention to that. The biggest tax increase in the history of California in Prop 15 in the split roll, that we have to pay attention to that cannot happen, and that it's done in the guise of helping the education sector, when the vast majority of that money is going to get to the educators, right? It's going to be used to create a whole new bureaucracy to collect this tax. And then I think the other piece is this whole question of virtual work, right? This is such a game changer. Lucy mentioned the apartments or houses where you're really going to have 2 home offices, and that people feel like, I'm going to work, right? I'm not just hiding in the corner of the guest room, but that you have all the things that you need. What does it mean for the freeways? What does it mean for congestion and a whole way of life? And I think Rich will probably speak to this, but if using Rich's terminology, if you're untethered, right, from your office, you can work anywhere. including outside the state of California. So I think big questions around policy that we've got to be paying attention to.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Perfect segue for Mr. Lambros.
Yeah, that's a good transition. I'll just run with that. And so you're asking about post-COVID and policy environment, and let me just take what Paul was talking about and run with it. And I think, obviously we're all making really educated guesses and analysis at this point. We don't have a lot of track record here to look to for actual data, but I think, all of us living in the world we're living in here in Southern California, it doesn't take a lot to look and go, wow, we saw an amazing acceleration in the digitization of work over instantaneously. Hey, work from home time, and everyone immediately found, not everyone, excuse me, but a whole bunch of people found a way to do it. And those sectors who have done it, we have some folks in Leadership Council. I told you about our group. Some of our CEOs are talking about how, they tracked their metrics, and they were thrilled to find out that they had zero drop off in productivity with their entire workforce working from home. So when you see that going on, and then you hear stories, now we've got stories out of the Silicon Valley with some of our biggest tech firms saying that, either their staff will not have to return to work, or very small portions will actually have to return to work. We really are going into a brave new world of rethinking our location of residence in relationship to our location of employment. And that's a game changer. And I don't want to overstate it. We don't know how it's going to play out, but that untethering, and thanks, Paul, for I don't know that I coined that, but the untethering is interesting because we're focused on it right now to our homes, right? And we all sit there and think, wow, if I can work effectively from home into that commute time, change my quality of life, drop into meetings remotely like we're doing now, really is a change perhaps in my quality of life, and I can live where I want to live. Well, California, I think what's going to be fascinating is, does California government, can we as the business community start to seize that point? Because you'd think that the smart reaction to that would be, oh boy, we better really work on our competitiveness here in California, because we're focused right now on where you can live, but that immediately goes to where businesses can domicile. And when businesses start leaving in droves, tax base goes away. So California's got a real interesting challenge coming up. We are, again, I went over the stuff going into the recession: complex regulation, high taxes, high cost of living. These were overcome by the fact that it was California, and a great quality of life, and a great environment, and great weather, and sometimes two big things from an economic point of view: proximity to markets, right, where you're sitting on some of the biggest population bases in the country. For some businesses, that's absolutely critical. And clusters. Lucy and Paul understand this. A lot of businesses absolutely need and thrive in clusters. That's why Silicon Valley. Now you got Silicon Beach. That's why we got Hollywood. That's why we've got biotech clusters in Orange County and San Diego. Clusters. Paul's got the logistic cluster in IE. They thrive off each other. So that may or may not change. Certain businesses, yes. Certain businesses, no. But it's going to be a dynamic time. And we, I think all of us on this call, have an obligation, go back to that virtuous cycle, to talk about why business is important. And we have to increase competitiveness in this state. We have to change dynamics around our cost of living and our taxes. We have to do that if we're now suddenly competing with all 50 states on a level playing field of where our residents could go. So I focused on that, but there's other factors too. I mean, we need, Lucy touched on manufacturing and the global supply chain. I think that's going to change dramatically. We learned a lot of lessons about the risks of offshoring over the last 4 months, and we got to rethink some of that for sure. And that's going to be good for the economy if we do that ultimately. And there's other things too, but really this dynamic around location, and then you guys can start playing that out for how it affects home building, how it affects, as I think Phil touched on certainly real estate, retail space. This could be very, very interesting how it plays out. And will California be a winner or loser? Right now, I think California's got a lot of catching up to do to be a winner in this new dynamic.
I also want to tack on, Rich is so right. It's not that we weren't warned. I mean, certainly at OCBC, a lot of the research IEEP does, Rich's group does. We already saw this coming, right? We already knew that we're over-retailed in California, that ghost malls could literally be put into your, Googled, and you could get vacant malls all over the nation. Pre-pandemic, all this stuff, we saw this. We already saw that the defensibility of jobs in artificial intelligence was going to be a big issue. Before pandemic, 49% of all of our jobs that we have today were going to go away, had the potential to be automated, you know, on a national level. So it's just when you get into a pandemic, these things accelerate. So no longer is it just retail. Now we're looking at commercial builders rethinking commercial space, right? And I had one bank said, hey, I just leased 3 floors. I'm just finding I only need 1. And that lease is going to look a lot different in the mid-range, those negotiations. Now, that doesn't mean that commercial, you know, building doesn't come back, and clearly we need to attract high-paying jobs. But these are kind of those systemic things that we have to watch out for, both short range, middle range, and then see what the long-term effects are going to be. Our middle-class jobs are highly subject to disruption, especially those industries that are used to making stuff with their hands, right? They're tactile, construction. I mean, a lot of that stuff can be automated, and we've just got to be prepared as leaders for that disruption to accelerate in this new environment. This isn't our first pandemic, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't our first. And so we need to be prepared for the next one.
Yeah, and I would say a clarifying point for everyone that's listening or watching. The pandemic also changes the way we advocate. It would be hard to get 50 of you in a room. And so you're seeing a shift. You're seeing it in Washington. They're talking about not having people cycle through the hallways. The way we as associations have to shift how we advocate. And the walking of the halls and making those trips are critically important, but we have to adjust accordingly as well. That's on us as associations. But what's on you all that we need to spread the word is by the simple click of digital advocacy, the simple click of registering for the newsletters. We need that to happen. It is so easy now. We've adapted to that. The more you can click, the more you can participate on these Zooms. It'll empower our associations more, and it doesn't have to be a BIA. If you don't like BIA, go to OCBC. If you don't like that, go. I mean, we're all in this together, but the one thing that escapes us that people need to realize is that it's not an Orange County versus an Inland Empire thing. We do not think that way at all. You're seeing a very large policy divide on Bay Area fixes for Southern California, and you're seeing it. And what's incumbent on us as associations is we need to get stronger leaders in office to advocate for Southern California. That's on us. The way we do it is by your participation. And you're seeing the North, you can blame it on Sacramento, but it really is the Northern electeds that are pretty much dominating the state. And I know the participants on this call, everyone's feeling, not just the business community, the utilities, the water agencies, we're all feeling that effect, and we need to do something to protect Southern California. And that is our focus, moving forward as an organization. So just wanted to clarify that, and it's not going away either. So, so here we go. We have a question from Mr. John Adams. How do we bridge the gap between public safety, law and order, and health? Oh, that's a tough one. This insurrection is as dangerous as COVID. So who would like to take that from Mr. Adams?
Public safety and health. Yeah. Well, I suspect, well, first of all, I want to acknowledge in the Q&A that in the chat feature, there's a bunch of links and stuff. So if folks needed any links to any of the information, Jeff has been posting them there. One of our questions there asked me to share that with you. I suspect this has to come with, Orange County Sheriff Don Barnes basically saying he wasn't going to enforce a mask order. And yet if you ask him privately, he does support that folks mask up. Again, the politics of health, when in the history of this country has health been a political issue? It's just the nature of the time that we're in. And I would just say we have to be the voice of reason, every one of us on this call, and not let that drive the agenda. That good health is good business. It matters. And it's just that simple. So as our political system tends to tribalize more, the Republicans are being too politically incorrect. Democrats are being too politically correct. And there's those of us in the middle that are ripe for the taking. And I think we need to be in the middle and advancing wise counsel to keep businesses going, fix those systemic problems, and do what Jeff says. We've got to elect the right elected officials to represent us in Sacramento. But in Orange County, I just saw an interview with Don Wagner on CNN, our supervisor. We look like we're backwater. Here, Orange County, I mean, we look so stupid in some of the stuff that people are saying about Orange County because we just won't, lead on the right issues. And our political leadership, for the first time, really matters. It really matters. Getting the right people, doing the right thing, and leading us in a way that makes good business and good health not a binary choice.
And the only thing I do want to add, just this, since we're talking about things in a business context, the public safety discussion, I know you all know this, but feel the need to remind us all this at this point in time. One of the things that separates doing business in this country versus the rest of the world is recourse to the law and order. You don't have to bribe an elected official to get what you need done. You can trust that if you have a grievance, you can go to court. The sanctity and really the functionality, and it has to be equal justice for all. I'm not trying to say this in any way to defend law and order over any group. It has to work for everyone. But it's the fact that it works and the fact that we have confidence in law enforcement is absolutely critical to the economy. Don't kid yourself. Go anywhere in the world. It's usually one of the biggest separation between a third world economy and the first world is just that, the ability to have confidence that your investment, your business, your activity is safe. And so it really is critical, however this current discussion shakes out to the economy. The linkage is.
Gosh, Rich, that is so important because business, the only thing they've asked of their government is predictability. They don't want to invest in their business if they can't predict where the regulatory agencies will go. And if there's any state that is unpredictable, it's been California in being able to figure out where do we invest. But the market is so big, people still feel that there's a California dream here, right?
Right.
And if you can succeed here, you can succeed anywhere. It's just.
Well, and I absolutely, Lucy, and I'm just, especially with the conversation we just had about what may be the new mobility of
Right.
business and individuals, and we will have maybe greater choices of where we want to live with our family and where we want to put our roots down. And where we put our roots down, it doesn't have to be necessarily next to 5 miles or 10 miles from my employer. In that environment, I think people will be also making choices on public safety. And so anyway, I just wanted to remind us that we do as a business community have a stake in this public safety discussion in a big way. And of course, on the public health side, which was also on the question, obviously, the sooner we can get the public health equation locked down and we're moving forward on this pandemic, the sooner we get to recovery. And that is the sad thing about what we saw over the last couple of weeks. Just when it felt like we were starting to get there, we're moving backwards. My organization keeps talking about the pandemic in 3 distinct buckets. And I only offer this because I think sometimes people jumble it all together. Relief, that's job one, and that's right where we were in March and April and May. Recovery, we got to get this economy coming back, and then reinvention, because we got to get smarter from what we learned from this. Some people are trying to jam reinvention on the front end, which I only say that because yes, we need to rethink the way we do things. We need to not be caught flat-footed on the next pandemic. But if you're going to try to reinvent business and government and all that, now, no, we need to get through recovery and allow reinvention to unfold when we can genuinely learn the lessons and then effectively implement change. So I just offer that to all of you. And unfortunately, it felt like we were getting out of relief and getting to recovery, and now we're back in relief. And I think it's really critical we get through that as quickly and effectively as possible.
Yeah, Jeff, and we haven't discussed the liability issue. I think we need to. But, to me, the answer to the question lies in we're getting pretty close to 200,000 dead Americans. All right. Let's not forget that. Okay. Kids do die of this. All right. So do you want to die? Is that what it takes, right? Do you want your kid or your grandkid to die? We cannot forget that that is why we're going through this, because people are dying. And if we listen to all the garbage and take our mind off of, you know, life, then we're going to be worse for it.
Well said, Paul. Well said. We have another question. Where do you anticipate public agencies getting funds needed to cover additional costs of COVID in addition to their normal operating expenses?
You know, Jeff, if I could on that, because it's something that I'm concerned. You know, most of our cities pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, weren't in a very good financial situation anyway, and now we enter the COVID, the pandemic period, where revenues are going to be severely down for our local municipalities, and I'm fearful they're going to look to our industry. When I say our, the housing industry as a whole, whether it's with new construction, whether it's with a transfer fee, whatever it be. But that is high on my radar and something we're watching, because you know, they're hurting for money prior to COVID, and this is only going to exacerbate their budgets. And so we're keeping a close eye on it, because I'm not sure where they're going to get the money they need to continue paying the bills they have.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Phil. And we know that the stimulus money, I mean, you know, where they print money is where it's coming from, and for immediate relief. But there will be, you know, next week we're going to go through the state budget. You know, the $54 billion shortfall. That is a house of cards. That budget is not a real budget, and it's very dependent on the federal government. So that is a problem in itself. And to Phil's point, and I'm sure Lucy could talk about it as well, and Rich, the unfunded liabilities, the pension liabilities, there were some colossal things that were already in the works that wasn't going well for California. But I would also remind people that it's not all bad. There was a lot of bad policy in development coming out of Sacramento, and this pandemic put a halt to that. Now there's newer bad policies out there. But I do think that at some point after COVID, there will be a massive course correction as a society on what we need and what we don't need. And there's going to be things that need to be changed. But to Phil's point, yes, I mean, you're looking at split roll, Prop 13, for those who don't know what that is. I mean, they are looking for funds. The Sacramento is like a very, very hungry shark, and it needs to eat, and it does not have enough. So there is a lot out there, and that's kind of why we're here. I mean, that's why we're here and why we have our state organizations as well. I don't know if anybody else wants to add on to that.
Well, whoever asked the question, I applaud. I mean, that's the question. I don't know that any of us have the answer yet. And I just to simply say what Jeff said, that clearly California is banking on a big federal bailout now for state and local. If it happens, you know, those of us who are concerned about federal tax policy, it's not good in a sense of deficit. It certainly, though, forestalls a lot of what will be ugly activity for new taxes and cuts and at the state and local government level in California. Conversely, if it doesn't happen, then those things will unfold. And the challenge is, where do you go to get that revenue? And that's why it's so hard to answer, because the economy right now, it's really hard to figure out where your revenue bases are. Even if you are going to go raid the coffers, it's not clear what's in the coffers right now. Your sales tax, where is it trending? Where is it going? You know, there's just a lot of unknowns. So that's exactly where we have to stay focused.
Yeah, and we saw at the local level too, right? We saw this pre-COVID with cities raising sales taxes city by city by city. Very hard to face, especially because their campaigns tend to be one of disinformation and misinformation, saying, oh, this is funding this and this is funding that. In reality, it was just funding their general funds. And so we look at, we're worried in the business community. Obviously, the state's a hot mess, but we're seeing local communities go, well, wait a minute, if we're not going to get funding from the state, how are we going to also come after our business community and raise local taxes on them? So we have to be vigilant at all levels of government, kind of to keep an eye on this stuff.
Absolutely. Final point, and we saw it in the last 2008 cycle, a Great Recession. There was so much maneuvering in Sacramento that funds got raided that took years to recover. Some have never recovered. We have a lot of funds in the state that puts money aside for important purposes. I'll point out one right now. SB1 funds are very important for transportation improvements, and we all voted to secure that money constitutionally. So far, thanks to efforts of some of the folks on this call and others, we've protected those monies so that transportation improvements, oftentimes that we need for development projects, continue to unfold. But that's the kind of stuff, like Lucy's saying, we got to stay vigilant on, a particular, these set-asides that last time around got completely either borrowed against, raided, redevelopment went away. It's never come back as an example. And certainly from a development perspective, that hasn't necessarily been good. So in difficult times, some financial maneuvering unfolds that doesn't necessarily look to the long term. It's just very
and that's a really important opportunity for us to pay attention to, because now in a pandemic, we're still dealing at this state with 1950s environmental and land use decisions. And it keeps driving the bias of, I had one letter request, Lucy, we need your support for $3 billion to fund transit. Excuse me, but they're 98% empty. So we're funding a bunch of HMO trains to run empty for a while. I get it, but shouldn't we be like incentivizing telecommute, which has a far better effect on greenhouse gas reduction emissions and meeting your climate change goals? We have transit-oriented development policies instead of jobs creation policies. Again, all of these systemic flaws in California that are coming to light, including what we just talked about, major tax reform and fiscal reform efforts that have been backpedaled for decades, right? There's nothing like a good pandemic to elevate these things. It's just picking the ones we want to focus on. But if we don't do something and say something, as BIASC does every single day, we're stuck still following these 1950s guidelines where the emperor has no clothes. When the governor does a state of the state address and focuses 100% of his address a year ago on housing, and housing gets worse, do you think we're on the wrong path here? That maybe something we should be doing is different than 1950s environmental practices? Enough said.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Lucy. And I want to wrap it up and thank everybody for joining the call. I want to thank Lucy and Phil. Thank you so much, Paul, Rich. Also want to thank you for your collective $1 million contribution to BISC. We'll expect that check in the mail. No, we're all working together, and I'm very happy with the coalition and the business relationship. I think everyone, you're going to start to see a little more strength and power and strut, and from how we work and how we just collaborate for our industries. We're all in this together. So we really appreciate everybody joining the call. Thank you for our special guests. We really appreciate that. And we'll see some of you next week for our state panel as well. So more to come, more fireworks to come. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you for having us, Jeff. Thank you. Bye, guys.